6:39 in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, I was just thinking, how do you get people to believe in fact and reliable information when many of them believe that A&R Robinson and the NAR put a dragon on the Red House? How do you get people to that kind of mentality to change? That they believe that A&R Robinson and the evil NAR put a dragon on the Red House, and it was up to the PNM to get it off and replace it with a dove. And the dragon slayer is now the Minister of Finance. How do you even govern seriously in a country like that? But anyway, the THA Amendment Act will be proclaimed today, which clears the way for a fresh THA election. Time for celebration, no doubt. Well, the Elections and Boundaries Commission will submit a report within 90 days on the redrawing of the electoral boundaries in Trinidad and Tobago. Remember, it has to go from 12 to 15. This is in line with the revised number of seats for the Assembly. This means the voters could possibly return to the polls before the end of the year. Well, let's get a legal perspective from Attorney at Law Martin George. He has one of the business chambers in Tobago as well. Mr. George, I know you've already expressed your view. You said that a lot of this is irrelevant as to the process of governance in Tobago. But again, it's due to be proclaimed today. This at least takes that step forward towards another election, whether at the end of the year or early next year. How do you see this rolling out? Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning to you, Fizzy, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. And, Fizzy, when one looks at it, it is clear that the proclamation, yes, it's a necessary step, but you ask yourself in terms of all the shenanigans which played out in the Parliament the last couple of months with regards to the pretense of trying to pass this Constitution Amendment Bill for the THA, you realize that it's just a replay of the same game that is played every 4 years or every 5 years by either side, depending on whether they're in government or in opposition. But be that as it may, we've already dealt with that. This here now is seeking to pave the way for fresh THA elections. And the question now is, in terms of the 15 seats that have been proposed here, where would the additional voters be coming from, in the sense of when you redraw the boundaries, how is it going to be skewed? And I think that's where you have to look at it in terms of where it becomes interesting. When one looks at the demographics in Tobago, the population is mainly centered in the western part of the island. Traditionally, you look at the electoral map in Tobago, and the PNM's stronghold has always been in the western side of the island. Now, I know the EBC has its guidelines and its rules as to how it can do the drawing of boundaries in terms of, trying to get to move from 12 to 15 seats. But I think that any which way you cut it, slice it, or dice it, it's going to work out quite nicely, I think, in terms of the PNM, because of the population centers being concentrated on the western side, because you have to draw the boundaries in such a way that it actually represents an equitable, as far as possible, distribution of the electorate. And the thing is, if you have most people concentrated in the western side, then you will end up, I think, with a little bit of a leaning towards more of the 3 additional seats. So maybe you might have 2 in the western side and 1 in the eastern side. So therefore, of course, that then brings in the political dynamic as to who benefits more from the 15 seats.
And in that sense, because, and you're right, because no matter how you redraw it, even if you do it purely on the basis of numbers and say that you want to get close as possible to 15 seats that have, of course, the numbers will never be exact, but as close as possible.
Have a margin, I think, of 10%.
Correct.
Plus or
minus. But somebody, whether it's the PNM or the PDP, will claim bias. Somebody will say that this redrawing is an outrage and favors one over the other. How does the EBC avoid that, if they can?
Well, the thing is, I mean, the good thing about the EBC, Fazil, in our political history in Trinidad and Tobago is that it has always been an institution that has stood above and beyond and apart from the political fray. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that under its current directorate, they will continue to do so. So, I mean, they have never been known to get involved in the partisanship or the gamesmanship on either side. And I think they will try to do their job as best as possible given the circumstances. But as I said, I think the circumstances are such that it does compel you to draw the inference that you may see of the two seats. Because, I mean, if you look at Tobago, if you look at it broadly in Tobago East or Tobago West, because those are the two parliamentary seats. So you already have that division there. So I think, okay, so therefore if it's 3 seats, then it has to be either 2 in the West or 2 in the East and 1 in the other side. And I think that the way the demographics are, you will see 2 seats in the West and 1 in the East.
So could we mark it down already that PNM win then?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the point is one has to look at the momentum which I think the PDP gained in the last THA elections. And I think that that momentum was remarkable because you consider that they moved from a position of 2 out of 12 to where they ended up with 6 out of 12. And the PNM, their position reduced from 10 out of 12 to 6 out of 12. So, I mean, as I said, you know, coming out of that last THA election, you know, while there were no winners, I think one looks at it, you could see that there was a clear loser, you know, I mean, without calling names.
As any legal professional would do, with an inference and an implication without calling names. You're really good, you know, Mr. George, in that regard. But as we move forward, before we even get talk a bit more of the specifics, because there's an interesting timeline, because if you look at the timeline, we're talking about 3 months from today, then another 2 months for the actual proclamation for the election period, which suggests to me that it has to be sometime early next year. But anyway,
that's right.
Is this process now leading towards another THA election, essentially overtaking all of the discussion about internal self-government and autonomy and so on? Is that now definitively in the background?
Well, no, Fazil. And, you know, and this is where, you know, you remember the discussion we had on the last occasion where I urged Tobagonians not to get caught up in this, you know, in the shenanigans and the games that are being played. Trust me, Fazil, those topics are going to be front and center on the electoral platform on both sides, because both sides will be claiming that, you know, they were trying to do this for Tobago and it's the other side that stopped it. And, you know the nonsense that plays out on the political platform, you know, so therefore that will be a front and center issue, especially given the recency of the presentation of those bills in the parliament. You know, so they will use that again. And as I say, Tobagonians appear to be quite willing to allow themselves to be used as a political football in this scenario, because they get chained up and hyped up over these issues. And as I keep saying, you know, they are much more fundamental and basic issues which ought to be, you know, agitating the minds of Tobagonians in terms of basics of your fundamentals for your own financial viability and economic sustainment. Because the point is that has not been put in place by either side. So each year the THA still comes to the parliament begging, cap in hand, for $3 billion or $4 billion or $5 billion, depending on, you know, the extent of their imagination at the time. But the point is, you are not self-sustaining, you are not self-generating in terms of your income. And that remains, I think, the most basic issue with the Tobago economy at this stage.
And because we're once more in a process, and time will hopefully will allow us other opportunities to have these discussions as we move along, heading up towards that election. When do you see that election taking place? Because again, the Prime Minister suggested maybe the end of the year, but if you do the numbers, we're almost to the end of July already. So proclamation today takes us to 90 days for the EBC to make their report. Assuming they take a full 90 days, that takes us to the end of October, end of October, correct? And then from the time it is proclaimed for the date for the election, it has to be 2 months hence, or at least not more than 3 months hence. So aren't we talking early?
No less than 2, no more than 3.
Correct. So aren't we talking early 2022?
Sorry?
So aren't we talking early 2022 based on those timelines?
Of course. We're talking January, we're talking January or maybe February. I mean, of course, depending on the question of whether there's a carnival next year or not, but that doesn't look very likely at this stage. So yes, you're looking at basically January. I think they're aiming for that election to be held.
And as we move towards that, are you anticipating that, as you said, a lot of the issues of governance and the issue of not going cap in hand and the begging bowl and so on, do you expect any of these issues to be raised in a serious way beyond the usual mudslinging? Who is to blame for this situation? And that's, do you get any sense that there's any willingness to have that real dialogue? Because I was actually, I wasn't saying, I would say taken aback when we had a call-in segment last week, and the former head of the Supermarkets Association, Mr. Baliram Maharaj, he expressed a bit of concern that he's not allowed to have a say in that process in Tobago, because he has property in Tobago, he has interest in Tobago, and you never know what Tobagonians could vote for and might influence his access to his assets in Tobago and so on. So to cut a long story short, do you really see any meaningful moving forward of the discussion about Tobago autonomy as distinct from independence?
Well, the thing is, I don't see that happening, and I think it's going to be the same old rhetoric on the platform as we have grown wary of and tired of over the years. And in terms of the fears expressed by Mr. Maharaj, I think those fears are largely unfounded and largely baseless, because every survey that has been conducted has shown quite categorically, and this is notwithstanding the posturings of some of the political entities. The surveys have always shown that Tobagonians certainly do not want secession. There's no question of that at all, and even in the discussion of the context of independence, it certainly has not been any poll that can show that Tobagonians have said they want to be totally separate from Trinidad as a standalone entity. And I mean, the point is, the practical reality of that is, okay, you cannot even take care of yourself. So, there's absolutely no question of saying you want to go and be a totally standalone entity. Where's your income going to come from? If you follow me, you're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and all these dreams and fantasies that, you have oil and gas in your waters. Those are not going to come to fruition. These are things that take 15, 20 years to develop, if you understand me. So, the dream that is being sold to Tobagonians over the years, in terms of, well, you have oil and gas wealth in the waters and you can exploit it on your own. These things don't happen just so. Look at Guyana. Guyana is taking time just to begin to try to, actualize what they have there, and they are not even nearly there. And in fact, a lot of the help is actually coming from Trinidad professionals who are there in Guyana, trying to help them get off the ground with this. So these things don't happen overnight. So therefore, you can't even talk about secession or being an independent entity. Even those who speak for Zero, and this is an important point, and I want the population to, mull on this. Even those who speak of having Tobago as a federal state, you can't have Tobago as a federal state by itself. If Tobago becomes a federal state, then that means Trinidad has to be a federal state too. And people don't seem to realize this. You can't have one federal entity by itself. If it is you talking about a federation or a federated state, then that means both Trinidad would be a federated state, and so also would Tobago. That means you have to change the entire constitution for Trinidad. You have to change the entire constitution for Tobago. Then you have to have now a master federation constitution to govern both as to how they're going to interact. So, these are things that, while not impossible, we need to understand the implications and ramifications and not get caught up with the rubber talk and the midnight rubber gun talk that the politicians, carry on and engage with on the platform without thinking the ideas through from a practical perspective as to how do we really implement these things. So it's easy to listen to the nice sounding phrases, well, we will be in charge of our own destiny. Oh yeah, that sounds really nice, right. When you have bills to pay, when you have responsibilities, then you will understand what being in charge of your own destiny involves. Then you will be asking yourself, where's the money coming from? Where are the finances coming from? Where are the investments coming from? So let's try to focus on the practical steps that can be done. One of the things that I've always said, the immediate repeal of the Foreign Investment Act, that will help Tobago. And I don't know why it is that those who are in charge of the THA are not pushing that idea, definitely with the central government, to have that act repealed. Because that act has crippled the direct foreign investment in Tobago. We keep complaining about lack of foreign exchange in TNT. We keep complaining about lack of foreign investment in Tobago. It's that act that cripples it. I have had scenarios where we've had clients from the UK, from the UAE, from several other countries in Europe who wish to invest in Tobago, but they say that act has created so many problems. So therefore, you know what they do for you? They take their money, they go to St. Vincent, they go St. Lucia, they go Dominica, they invest their monies there because they may have a hotel project, a guest house project, maybe a restaurant project. But the point is that Foreign Investment Act has so stifled and crippled anyone who wants to do direct foreign investment in Tobago that they just don't bother. It's not worth the hassle.
Mr. George, we'll have to continue that discussion at another time because there are so many issues in the mix. But thank you very much indeed for taking the time once again, Mr. George.
It's a pleasure chatting with you, Faziri.
Indeed.
Have a good morning.
You take care. Martin George, attorney at law, giving his perspective once again as we anticipate the proclamation today from the president. Although I wish she could just find her excuse to delay it to tomorrow, just to remind everybody about July 27th. But as we go to the top of the hour, here's an evening image captured by Rena of Gasparilla with a bit of the full moon as well, because it was full moon over the weekend. And now some mango chow courtesy of Shoba Bola of Kuva. How peppery do you like your mango chow, assuming you like mango chow at all? News coming up, and then we move into the second hour.